Ladies and gentlemen, we live in times where our property is under siege by government forces. During this conference, I'm sure you have seen many instances of this. However, our final speaker fights against these belligerent violations of our private property just the same. This man, as you will see, attacks aggressively against the perverted socialized healthcare system, and he will continue to fight for a right to choose where we put our money in the market. Austin Petersen is the editor-in-chief of the Libertarian Republic News magazine and LibertyViral.com. He is a former presidential candidate for the Libertarian Party ticket, as well as CEO of Stonegate. But more importantly, he is a heavyweight in the liberty movement. So ladies, gentlemen, liberty lovers of all ages, please put your hands together for Mr. Austin Petersen.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Wisconsin. It's great to be here. I'm very grateful for you all for inviting me. Thanks very much for taking out your weekend and coming out here to talk about the important subjects that are facing our nation. Before I get to my presentation and talk a little bit about the more dry topic of Obamacare and give you an explanation of why Obamacare is socialism, how we got here, where we could be going with our healthcare system, I'll just give you a brief little idea of kind of who I am. That was a fantastic intro, by the way. Thank you, Khalid. But if you don't know, I ran for president of the United States on a platform of taking over the government to leave everyone alone. And that was the catchphrase for the campaign. And it was very effective because it sounds aggressive, but then on the end, it leaves you alone, right? And one of the criticisms that was leveled at me during the campaign, specifically in the debates, was that I spoke in a series of bumper stickers. Now I sound like a libertarian meme. And, well, how do you think Donald Trump won the nomination for the Republican Party? Make America great again? So I'm very much the type of guy who thinks that we definitely need to not water down our principles, but we need to be able to break them down into sound bites. Because we're nerds, okay? We're not just nerds, we're nerds. And people, I mean, if you think people don't like nerds, man, not even nerds like nerds. Right? And so the problem is that for us as libertarians, finding a way to communicate our principles to the American people is difficult because they don't have time to read a white paper. You know, they don't have time to sit down and read or even to listen to this full-blown lecture on why we need to have a free market in healthcare. So that's why I started, several years ago, I started the Libertarian Republic and started LibertyViral.com, one of my writers right here. And the idea was that we would take all the tools, everything that I learned when I was working at Fox. I'm not sure if you guys know Judge Napolitano, but I was his television producer for a number of years, and I learned the secrets of how to take major concepts and break them down into sound bites so that it's palatable to a mainstream audience. I mean, theoretically, you could run as a full-blown anarcho-capitalist, and no one would know as long as your rhetoric sounded mainstream, right? Taking over the government to leave everyone alone. Taxation as theft is another good one. But maybe you want to wait to let the freak flag fly until you don't like it. And I know because I did get in trouble. I didn't win, of course. And some people say it's because I said we don't need driver's licenses. But that's because they never gave me the option to explain that that's because we would privatize the roads. So the liberals who were arguing about that one, I'm sure that will come up later because Gary Johnson's people, boy, they wept. The next day I was in a press scrum surrounded by people and Johnsonites were screaming at me, "You don't even believe in driver's licenses!" I'm like, whoa, Status, back up. And you guys are all young people. One of the other criticisms that was leveled at me during my campaign, that John Stossel came up to us during the debates and said, "I've got a problem with all three of you. And the problem with Gary Johnson is he seems like he's stoned all the time." And the problem with John McAfee was that he might have killed somebody. Right, and the problem with me is that I'm 12 years old. But if you missed it, my response to that was that I'm 35 years old, so that makes me constitutionally eligible. But if you didn't know, on July 4th, 1776, Thomas Jefferson was 33 years old. James Madison was 25 years old. Alexander Hamilton was 21 years old. And the Marquis de Lafayette was 18 years old. I'm not going to be like Trump and tell you to take the baby out. We want the baby here, so don't worry about it. It doesn't bother. But young people can accomplish incredible things. I took second place in a presidential primary the first time I ever ran. Raised almost, thank you. The people who are criticizing others and saying something that can't be done need to stay the hell out of the way of the people who are doing it. Because if you're not doing it, don't kick down other people's sandcastles if they're trying to accomplish something great. Ignore the haters. Acquire the presidency.
Yeah, right.
You can do whatever you want, provided you harm nobody else. So today I want to talk to you about Obamacare. I want to open up with this anecdote. This is a true story. The year that I was born in 1981, the New York Times reported that the federal government had demanded that farmers in California dump millions of oranges into the trash. The author, by the name of Doug Foster, wrote that, quote, "Oranges are left rotting so as to keep prices high for farmers and to keep consumers from buying oranges at lower prices." Does the government know what it's doing? Does it care? Now listen to this. And this should destroy any belief in the well-meaning government bureaucrat. The response of the FDA bureaucrat, a guy by the name of Ben Darling, to that was that, quote, "Oranges are not an essential food. People don't eat oranges, they can take vitamins." Whoa, excuse me? Think about that attitude when it's applied to healthcare. You don't need oranges. You guys can just take vitamins. And they were doing this, they were destroying crops in order to keep prices high. Why? Because they wanted to benefit the farmers. They were like, well, the farmers were worried because they had overproduction of this crop. They said, okay, well, in order to keep the prices high, we'll destroy oranges. Why not give it to homeless people? Just last week in Kansas City, my home of Kansas City, they had 100 pounds of barbecue that the government stepped in and bleached. They were trying to give it to homeless people, the American world, destroying food. And that has an upward effect on prices. Now, premiums are skyrocketing right now. I know a lot of you guys are still in college and you're not paying for health care. Obamacare makes it so that you can be on your parents' plan until 26, but when you get to be my age, start experiencing some health issues, you're going to want to have health care. Well, when I first started my business in 2013, I quit my job, very lucrative job, and I was like, I'm going to the marketplace, I'm going to be an entrepreneur. I'm going to start talking about capitalism and start engaging in it. And then Obamacare hit. Now, I had a great plan. It was a silver plan. It was $90 a month, and my deductible was $1,500. And then Obamacare hit. If you liked your plan, you could keep your plan. Apparently not, because my health care plan was canceled, my premiums tripled, and my deductible went up to $5,000. Thanks, Obama. Now listen to this. Right now, Obamacare is falling apart. If you're a single person and you earn more than $47,000, or if you're a family of four and you make around $97,000, the premiums and deductibles, meaning health care, is going to be out of reach for a lot of you. And a lot of the people who are on the marketplace, if you're on Obamacare, for example, the deductibles are like $7,500. What is the point of even having insurance if you have to pay $7,500 out of pocket before you can even start collecting insurance? I mean, medical insurance was meant to keep you guys from having medical experience, having a medical expense that was going to drive you into financial ruin, and now the medical insurance is going to drive us into financial ruin. I mean, listen to Bill Clinton. He said, you got this crazy system where all of a sudden 25 million more people have health care, and then the people who are out there busting it sometimes 60 hours a week wind up with their premiums doubled and their coverage cut in half. It's the craziest thing in the world. That was Bill Clinton. And he went on to say the current system works fine if you're eligible on Medicaid, or if you're a lower income working person, if you're already on Medicare. But the people that are getting killed in this deal are small business people and individuals who make just a little too much to get any of these subsidies. And that was it. No more health care. Despite the fact that I have asthma and I need health care, it's now unaffordable. For people like me who are entrepreneurs, if you want to be a small business person, don't think about getting health care, Because as soon as you make over $47,000, you're cooked. If you want decent health care, you're going to pay $500 to $1,000 out of pocket, and then you're going to have a deductible of around $5,000. So this is what, and it's the middle class that suffers. Because it's the middle class that have to pay these premiums out of their own pocket. The entrepreneurs have to pay it out of their own pocket. But then, of course, if you have a job, and all it does is force us to go into labor to go work for somebody else because you want to get health insurance from your job. And that's what happens. So we're discouraging entrepreneurship with a system that ties health insurance to our jobs. We shouldn't have done that in the first place. Every time the government makes a reform, there's always the unintended consequences that happen. Now, is Obamacare socialism is the question. And this is what I really want to get into the nitty-gritty with you on. Because a lot of people actually don't understand what socialism is. And that's because a lot of liberal democracies like Great Britain practice it, but so does North Korea, right? So what is socialism? We define socialism. It's in two parts. One, the public provision of non-public goods, taking your stuff. And two, economic central planning. Listen to this. Welfare in and of itself is actually not considered socialism technically. It's not just about the redistribution of wealth. It's about much more than that. So a food stamp program, for example, is a form of welfare. But government-run farms or government-run grocery stores is socialism. Now, some examples from history might be what Harry S. Truman did to the steel industry, or what Bhutto in Pakistan did. She nationalized the petrochemical industry, and then, of course, in the United States, we also have Fannie Mae and we have farm subsidies. These are all examples of socialism defined. But Obamacare is socialism. It's not just welfare. Let me explain why. Now, people who apply for Obamacare subsidies are receiving a form of welfare, and that'd be one thing. The reason that Obamacare is socialism is because of the exchanges and because the government is fixing the prices. Central planning of the pricing of health insurance is socialism, but it's not quite single payer yet. Now, the reason why Obamacare is technically socialism is because they're designing the plans, right? So it is technically central planning simply because the government is deciding what kind of health insurance you're going to get. Right now, gentlemen, you're all paying for birth control. How many babies are you going to be having? Right? So the reason why my premiums and one day your premiums are going to be high is because you're going to be paying for medical procedures that you'll never get. And socialists desire that. They're willing to increase the cost if that means that more people are going to get care. Right? We passed the bill, we found out what's in it. It's socialism. Okay? But why is it failing, right? So socialism fails because if food is a human right, then everybody deserves equal access to it. Well, then what about truffles? Right? Those are $300 a mushroom. Or what about steaks, right? If healthcare is a human right, what if the doctor wants to take a day off and he's the only guy on the island to perform heart surgery? Okay? Do you send guards to go get him and bring him in? Right? So he's the only guy on the island that could do heart surgery that day, but he gets a day off at least once a year, maybe not in North Korea. But how do you enforce that? Essentially, capitalism means that we allow the market to work and we accept state pricing over central planning. And when prices are high, we all know what happens. Competition kicks in, entrepreneurs are incentivized to step in. But when there is no easy access to supply, steak, truffles, or heart surgery, then no amount of government force can possibly guarantee supply. And that is why socialism doesn't work. Now, what about the people who laughed at the concept of death panels? In a centrally planned marketplace, rationing is not only unavoidable, it's actually desirable on behalf of the socialists, because socialists are risk averse. You're not going to find a socialist who are entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs are people who are not afraid of taking risks. But a socialist is someone who wants to have a social safety net. They're fine with saddling us all with collective debt, collective burden, so long as they think that more people will be provided for. But you know that doesn't work that way. And this was the rationalization for Obamacare. But even if the poor aren't receiving health care, if their premiums are $300 a month and their deductible for the bronze plan are $7,000, they're not getting health care. So, and for those who say that Obamacare is not single payer, yeah, you guys need to take a look at the National Health Service of Britain in the 1970s and the way that the socialists managed to take over their healthcare system, because it actually began as handouts for the poor and the infirm, and then they nationalized the insurance industry. So how did we get here? And this is the kind of stuff, this is the constitutional stuff that we really need to understand, because if some of you are going to go out there, if you're going to be politicians, or you're going to run for office one day, you need to understand the legal arguments that are made in favor of programs like Obamacare and how absolutely ridiculous they are and antithetical to liberty. So we're going to talk about the story of a man by the name of Roscoe Filburn and the Interstate Commerce Clause, which some of you might be familiar with. Now, Wickard v. Filburn was a Supreme Court decision that dramatically increased regulatory power in the United States. It was a test case that was heard in the United States right after we entered World War II. And the goal of the business interests who were behind this, they were trying to finance the legal challenge that and it went all the way to the Supreme Court, was to declare that the entire federal crop support program was unconstitutional and they wanted to end it. Now, what the Filburn decision did was it supported what Congress had done, and it basically enabled congressional regulation that included economic activity that only indirectly was related to interstate commerce. So essentially, Roscoe Filburn was growing wheat and he was using it to feed animals just on his own farm. Okay, he wasn't selling it. But the U.S. government had established these limits on wheat production based on acreage owned by the farmer. So you could only grow a certain amount of wheat in the 1940s on your own farm. Now, in 1941, Filburn grew more than he was allowed to in order to, on his wheat production, and the government stepped in. They said, okay, you're going to have to pay a penalty now, Roscoe, of 117 bucks. Now, he claimed his wheat was not sold in interstate commerce, and so the penalty could not apply to him. Okay, so he's growing wheat on his own land, and he's not selling it, but they used the Interstate Commerce Clause to step in and say you're affecting interstate commerce. Well, how? Well, listen to this. The Supreme Court stated that the intended disposition of the crop here involved has not been expressly stated. Whether the subject of regulation in question was, quote, production, quote, consumption, or, quote, marketing, is therefore not material. So whether he was actually producing wheat was not material to this. The question is of whether his activity was legal or whether Congress is overreaching in regulating him. Is he growing wheat? Is it happening on his own property? Is he selling? Is he selling it? Well, he's not selling it. But the government is saying, according to the Interstate Commerce Clause, we have the right to regulate. And the Interstate Commerce Clause is Article 1, Section 8. It says that the Congress has the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and with the Indian tribes. And we'll get into the original meaning of the Commerce Clause here just in a minute. But the court decided that Filburn's wheat growing activities reduced the amount of wheat he would buy for animal feed on the open market. So, because he was growing his own wheat, he was self-sufficient, that meant that he was not out there in the marketplace buying wheat. So since you're not buying something, you are affecting interstate commerce. Keep that in your head. All right? Now they said, okay, it's one thing if Roscoe Filburn does it, but what if thousands of people don't go out and buy wheat? That could really impact the economy. If everybody is being self-sufficient and growing their own wheat, then they're impacting interstate commerce. Now, what's amazing about this precedent is that how it applies to Obamacare was they used the Interstate Commerce Clause under the same idea, the same concept of government regulation in order to pass Obamacare. But think about this. You can't buy insurance across state lines. You're being told that not buying insurance is an equivalent to affecting interstate commerce, but the law is written so that you can't buy insurance across interstate. So it makes no sense. So not buying insurance is the same thing as affecting interstate commerce. It makes no sense. And that's basically the equivalent of walking into a store, not buying a pack of gum, and the cashier says that'll be $1. what on earth? Why? That makes no sense. Now, you have to understand the original intent of the Commerce Clause. Now, a lot of people talk about original intent of the Constitution, strict constructionism. So what was the original intent? This is gleaned very heavily from my old boss, Judge Napolitano. So when the Revolutionary War was fought, and we had the Articles of Confederation, people complained because there wasn't enough power of Congress in order to regulate the commerce between the many states. And this was a problem. Why? Because under the Articles of Confederation, before the Constitution was written, if you wanted to ship a barrel from Hoboken to New York, then the state of New York would levy a tariff. And this was a real problem. So the Constitution, when they originally wrote the Commerce Clause, was meant to keep commerce regular. In essence, they wanted to make it so that interstate commerce would be more easy, not more difficult. So whenever a statist or a big government apologist comes in and tells you, oh, well, the Interstate Commerce Clause, allows us to do that. That's not what the original intent of the Commerce Clause was meant for. It was meant to keep commerce regular. Now, they've taken it to say that this means that they can regulate everything, meaning things that you don't do. So you don't sell your wheat. Okay, well, we can regulate you because you're not buying something. Okay, well, I'm not buying insurance. Well, we can regulate you because you're not buying insurance. Now, I'll play devil's advocate for just a minute here, guys, and this is thought exercises here. The argument that they made for Obamacare is that, well, if you're not buying insurance and you get sick, well, then you qualify for the law that says that you must, if you go into a hospital, that you must be treated, right? So the government forces hospitals to provide health care to everyone, regardless of ability to pay, to keep you stabilized, right? We all know this. But it's a problem of the government's own creation, because the government is saying that if you go into a hospital, you have to be taken care of, and since we forced you to be taken care of, now we have to force you to buy health insurance, because we had to force you to be taken care of, and because you're not buying health insurance, you're now affecting interstate commerce because you're not buying insurance. So now we have to tax you. Don't let them call it a fine. It's not a fine. It's a tax. So I'll finish with this simple anecdote, then we can do a little Q&A and have a little more fun. Has anybody ever seen what was it called? The Incredibles? It's a great movie, right? But progressives are kind of like Syndrome from The Incredibles. They are. Right? They work to create policies that will fail so that they can swoop in and pretend to be heroes and offer their state-sponsored solution. And when everybody's super, no one is. Now, Obamacare, for example, was meant to destroy our healthcare system. It's called Cloward-Piven strategy. You guys need to look it up because they want to destroy the healthcare system. They do this intentionally so that they could come in and offer single payer while blaming the destruction on free markets. And when the government forces everyone to have healthcare, soon enough, no one will. Thanks very much. All right, we will not be talking about who will build the roads. Yes, sir. Well, okay, we'll talk about the roads. So it depends. The plural of anecdotes is not data. I'll just throw some anecdotes out at you anyway. Conceptually, if you own a store, if you own a mega mall, don't you have an incentive to make sure that customers can get to market? Why did we have roads before 1913? We had roads before we had a progressive income tax. We had fire departments, we had police. Right? There have been plenty of examples of private roads. We have toll roads, but people don't like toll roads. But that is something more along the lines of what libertarians might argue for. In Hawaii, for example, there was an example of a road that got washed out, and the government wouldn't fix it. So the citizens all stepped in, paved the road because they were losing money because the local business owners couldn't get their products to market, people couldn't come buy things. There was a man by the name of Dashrash Manji in India who, his wife was ill. It was 9 miles to the local hospital, so he literally carved a path through a mountain so that he could bring his wife to the hospital. Life finds a way. another question?
I do. Who would build the interstate highways?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, the way that interstate highways were built were on the backs of national security. Dwight Eisenhower argued that during the Cold War, if there was ever a nuclear strike, that essentially we would need this in order for us to travel from state to state. I don't know, actually. I don't know who would build the interstate highways, but I'm not an anarchist. Right? I lean that way. But I think that if there is a necessary and proper clause in the Constitution, that can obviously be stretched to, I think, the point of ridiculousness. But I don't see interstate highways as being probably the greatest threat that humanity has to face. So it doesn't quite bother me until they start talking about eminent domain, and that's an issue. So I can't say I wouldn't know. But I definitely don't think we need a Department of Transportation in order to figure that out. Yes, sir. Yeah.
How would you solve the justice system issue? And I want to know, as president and given ultimate power, what would be the best system in your opinion?
Well, if I was given ultimate power, the first thing I would do would be to repeal the law that made me a dictator. Because I do believe in some form of democratic deliberation, meaning that we have the right to select our leaders, and I believe that is an individual right. But if president, the question again was
The justice system.
the justice system. Well, the fish rots from the top down. So the president being in charge of the executive branch, I would ensure that all of the officers under my purview were mandated to read, learn, and understand the Constitution. And essentially, I would relegate the police to the role of public servants. And I would remind them that they are civil servants. They are not masters of us all. And that they serve us. We do not serve them. And I think that we would have to take a look at how we deploy lethal and non-lethal force. I think we need an overhaul of our justice system. We need a complete end to the war on drugs, which is a total failure. Love that clause. Firstly, there's the moral issue. You own your right, you own your life, your body. You ought to be able to do with it as you please, provided you harm no one else. No one's business what you put into your body. It's control of your mind. And then there's the ethical issue, and then when you talk about actual policy, if you want to kill people from heroin overdoses, well, the war on drugs is doing a damn good job of that. Our policy right now is encouraging more deaths because people are living in the shadows. They're afraid to get help. Right? And we also have to understand that drugs do have different classifications. Right? Like heroin is not the same as marijuana, right? So there ought to be an educational process. We're going to have to educate our fellow American citizens on the dangers of these drugs, right? Just because we want them legal doesn't mean we advocate for doing them. Then you end up like John McAfee. Well, if we all ended up like John McAfee, then do drugs, because he's great. He's amazing. But we do need criminal justice reform. I think that, and I don't like to just flippantly use the R word, but I think it has racist outcomes, even though it may not be intended to do so. But you see policing, they're not arresting white kids in white communities. Right? So if you want to enfranchise blacks, you need to stop punishing them for engaging in a non-violent behavior. So criminal justice reform I can talk about all day. There's also the issue of drones. Two types of drones. Weaponized drones, observational drones. Ask yourself this, this is a libertarian quandary. From a theoretical perspective, we have policemen in helicopters doing chases, right? Very expensive, dangerous for the lives of the officers. Would you prefer that we use a drone? Because a drone, if it's just observational, a drone could conduct a police chase with minimal chance of danger to the lives of the police officer and citizens involved. You can track the person with the drone. Now, of course, you have probable cause for that, but we have to make sure that no matter what the government does, if they use drones observationally, that needs to be conducted within reasonable limits. Ask yourself this: how much air above you do you own on your own private property? You can't say that an airplane can't fly over you, so then you also can't say that a drone can't fly over you, at least within a certain distance. So what is the distance? What's the most libertarian distance a drone must keep away?
Not gun distance.
Right, shotgun. That's not that far. That's not that far. A shotgun doesn't actually go that far. A shotgun would be ineffective probably all the way to the end of that room, actually. So these are the questions we have to ask ourselves. The FAA is actually doing that kind of research right now, and I hope libertarians will get involved because we're going to have to start thinking of these kinds of deep state policies. We have a bigger picture view of the economy, a macro view of the economy, and we aren't going to be able to solve these problems until we can get in and start putting some libertarians in so that we're the ones who are deciding what the econometrics are, zoning laws, FAA regulations, and all that. So, but it's a problem because we don't like the state, so a lot of us don't join up. Yes, sir.
So back in the debates talking about foreign policy, you said to fight ISIS you use letters of marque or prize. I know that technique hasn't been used in like decades or something.
Since the War of 1812.
Since the War of 1812, exactly. So isn't there kind of a reason nobody's used this in such a long time?
Yeah, because they're cowards.
And it's used to like fight pirates. So it's just how would you implement that to like get the job done?
Well, it would be similar to offering a bounty, right? Send Dog the Bounty Hunter over there. Or Eric Prince. I mean, libertarianism is not pacifism.
Okay.
Don't tread on me means don't tread on me for a reason. If we have a legitimate, credible threat, and it's a non-state actor, because the Tripolitan pirates, Thomas Jefferson's time, the ones that he fought, he did fight them with the Marines, but he also fought them with letters of marque. I mean, as a matter of fact, the Continental Navy was almost non-existent during the Revolutionary War. Privateers almost completely won the Revolutionary War at sea. The sea battle was almost entirely fought with merchant mariners who converted their fighting sails, to warships. All of the guns were owned by the private seamen. And essentially, if you've got a bad guy like Abu al-Baghdadi, or you've got, Osama bin Laden, you have every right to take those guys out. Now, the government can't do that without life, liberty, or due process. So here's the problem: a terrorist isn't going to show up in court for you to convict them. So how in the world can you conduct that? We have a problem in foreign policy because as libertarians, as non-interventionists, as people who want a reduced role for foreign military actors, we quail at the mention of murder. But how do we protect due process for someone that has no respect for due process themselves? We're going to have to find a new way of defining due process for terrorists. And that's why we have Guantanamo Bay right now, is because the statists and the neoconservatives are redefining due process. And because we've taken a hands-off approach, just stay out, stay uninvolved, the neoconservatives have set policy. So a letter of marque and reprisal does need to be updated for the 21st century. I think the last time we had anything similar to it was actually during World War II. There were some guys off the coast of California who owned a Zeppelin, and they were given contracts from the government for any Japanese subs that they blew up. I mean, that's awesome. So yeah, we need to, but libertarians have got to get a little more don't tread on me on our foreign policy. You can be a pacifist and be a libertarian, that's perfectly fine. But that's not all we are. That's not all we are. Don't tread on me means what it means. No step on snake. Yes.
So I'm a sophomore in high school, and so I've been through the negative impacts of Common Core, and I feel like it's really going down our education. So what would be your plan to get rid of it?
Talking about Common Core. Well, the easiest way to do it is to just, cut off the head of the hydra at the base, and that's end the Department of Education. I'm not in favor of even the states necessarily running education. I don't like the idea that the government needs to run education because it's always going to be a pro-state viewpoint, right? It's not going to be one dedicated to individual liberty. The point of education is to turn you into obedient workers. The idea behind education is that we want to have a fresh harvest of humans to work the factories, work the machines. Actually, Henry Ford didn't like the idea of state education either, but the reason why he didn't like it was because he didn't want his workers getting too smart. Because he wanted a factory line. He had a factory line approach. He wanted people who were just smart enough to run the machines, but too dumb to know that they were getting screwed. So I like the idea of homeschooling, and I think we ought to encourage that in society. Yes, sir.
I saw your Facebook about how if you received $1 million, Senate.
Damn it.
I'm wondering, I hope you get a million likes, but my question is, do you see the future of libertarianism within the Republican Party, or because of the majority districting, or do you see it in the Libertarian Party?
If Trump wins, then there is no future for libertarians in the Republican Party, at least not in the next 4 years, and maybe not the next 8 years. If Trump winning would probably be the best thing for the Libertarian Party, because if Trump wins, then there will be no Libertarian Republican challenger in 2020. So that would probably mean that a vote for Hillary is a vote for Justin Amash in 2020. These are the outcomes that we have to consider. Game theory means that you're going to consider every possible outcome, right? If Hillary wins, then you could have Justin Amash in 2020, and the chaos and the civil war in the GOP will continue. So if there's a Hillary landslide, that might be bad for the Libertarian Party, because in the short term, we would have Libertarian Republicans emboldened in the Republican Party. So consider both outcomes when determining what the future might be in order to ascertain what might be the best strategy. Yes, sir.
And you're citing the case Wickard v. Filburn. Why is the question always, can Congress regulate instead of should Congress regulate?
That's a good question. I don't know. I'm actually not a constitutional lawyer. I majored in musical theater. So if any of you are liberal arts majors, there's hope.
What was your biggest challenge in your primary run?
Ooh, that's a really good one. There are a lot of challenges, and I made a lot of mistakes. As a matter of fact, the mistakes that I made during my campaign were not mistakes that I made on principle. They were mistakes that I made on tactics. Because I thought I was making, several cases, I thought I was making the principled choice, and it was the principled choice. I was acting out of pure principle when I should have been acting out of tactics. That doesn't mean that I would set principle aside. It just meant that I was too focused on the principle and I wasn't focused on tactics. And this is the example of that is, during the convention, I had to decide who my vice presidential candidate would be, or at least, or I didn't have to, but I needed to signal who I thought would be a good vice presidential candidate. Once it became clear that I would not be the presidential nominee, the delegates choose who the vice presidential nominee would be. So being the runner-up, my word had a lot of say. So there were two candidates who emerged as frontrunners for the VP slot. One was a man by the name of Larry Sharp, and the other one was a woman by the name of Alicia Durham. Now, I knew Alicia Durham, and I knew her experience. I knew she was a ballot access lawyer. I knew she was a hardcore libertarian. I didn't know Larry Sharp. I didn't know her. Now, in retrospect, I know a lot more about it. But at the time, because I knew Alicia Durham, because I knew her, she had experience, she was a ballot access lawyer, because I thought she would be good for the party, I supported Alicia over Larry Sharp. Now, I did that out of principle because I thought it would be good for the party. But the whole party, who were trying to stop Bill Weld, wanted Larry. But I didn't care because I wasn't trying to do the tactical thing. I thought I was doing the principle thing. And what happened? We got Bill Weld. That's partially my fault. And I take responsibility for that. And I regret it. I should have supported Larry Sharp because that was the tactical move. My people were telling me that, but I was hard-headed and I thought I knew better. And that's the failure of politicians right there. But my fault was that sometimes I didn't take the tactical move. I should have taken the tactical move. I made the principled move. It doesn't mean losing principle, but it means just sometimes you need to get your head out of your books and start thinking about art of war. That's really what politics is. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
I think one of the biggest things facing this generation is we're currently at 19 trillion in debt, soon to be 20 trillion in February. If you had an option for the president, what would be the big things that you would look at coming on the wider?
So my fiscal strategy that I had proposed during the campaign was a budget called the penny plan. So essentially what the penny plan would do is it would cut 1 penny out of every federal dollar. So every single program gets a cut. Just a little hair, just a little off the top. All right? Just the tip. And then you imagine that in the White House? Sorry. So that way, you you couldn't complain, because if you start saying, oh, we're going to start cutting from the housing and urban development, you're going to start cutting from here or there, there's a constituency that's going to scream. But if everybody takes a little bit of a haircut, 1 penny out of every federal dollar, and you do that every year, 1% every year, the federal budget would have come into balance in 5 years. Libertarians are like, I don't want a balanced budget, I want to cut. Well, I do too. But this is a strategy that I think is the best way for us to go forward. All federal agencies, across the board, 1% cut. I can't think of anyone who could say that the government every program couldn't do with just a little less money. Now the seniors are going to cry anyway, right? You're trying to kill grandma off Medicaid. But the idea is that the thing is you have to optimize for efficiency. And that's one thing that Governor Gary Johnson is great, and I'm definitely voting for him, by the way, is that he managed to cut the administrative cost and offer that as the spending cut, right? So he made them do more with less. And that's my whole philosophy, is to make people do more with less. And I've actually done that in my own business. The LibertarianRepublic.com used to be me 14 hours a day, blogging away by myself. And there was this high cost on my time for me to be able to do it. And then I realized, okay, well, some people will volunteer, some people who, and I can't afford to pay them just yet. So I was able to, in the beginning, I was able to, get it to where I can now manage a team of writers, right? And then now that I'm managing a team of writers, some of these people are starting to show that they've got skill and talent. Those people are actually, rising to the top. I can pay them, and now we have a new structure, and I'm doing more with less. So now it takes me much less time to do everything that I used to be able to do. So it's all about having a business-like approach to government. So I think that that's really what we need to do, is we need to optimize for efficiency, cut out redundancy. So like the Department of Homeland Security, for example, didn't exist before 9/11, okay? And it's redundant as hell. You've got all of these different agencies all committed to doing the same thing. Now, devil's advocate here, if you're in security, you need redundancy, right? It's just like if you have a server and a hard drive, don't give it to Hillary, but if you've got a server, you need a dual server so that it mirrors back and forth. But what we have with the federal government is a mirror, a mirror, a mirror, a mirror, and then the problem is that the way the systems work is that they all go down, right? They all fail on 9/11. So we don't need more redundancy, we need to optimize for efficiency, essentially. Yes, sir.
So I noticed this election cycle, libertarians are getting a lot more attention than ever, but we're still often misunderstood or just completely unknown. What were some of the more interesting opposing viewpoints that you had on the campaign trail?
What do you mean?
So, like, I guess just people who didn't really understand, what you're doing here as not a Republican or a Democrat.
I'll tell you a secret. Most of the people who I met on the campaign trail that were not libertarians actually didn't care what I believed. They didn't care what my policies were. You know what they cared about? If I was a nice guy. They cared about if I listened to them. Because in a representative republic, you send people to Congress to act on your behalf, so you have to like them and you have to trust them. Libertarians are kind of assholes. They are. I mean, go check my Twitter feed right now. I got the anarcho-capitalists, attacking me over here for being a statist, and then I've got the alt-right Ku Klux Klanners over here attacking me for being a Hillary shill. Right? And they think they're libertarians, and then the ANCAPs are like, "Also, you're not a libertarian." I mean, we're kind of jerks. So honestly, if we want to push public policy forward, we might try a little bit nicer appeal. As a matter of fact, you know what people really like? They don't like to hear your ideas. They like you to hear their ideas. I was just telling somebody this story. I got so many pledged votes from people who I never said a word to, really, and I just listened to them, and then when it was done, they were like, "Well, thanks so much for listening. You got my vote." How do you think Trump is? Where do you think Trump came from? Low information voters. Being a good listener is important. It's very important. Because, as a matter of fact, if you do get a chance to tell them what you believe, once you know what they're libertarian on, and everybody's libertarian about something, once you know what they're libertarian on, you can agree with them. This is just plain how to win friends and influence people. Once you have agreement, you can widen the opportunity for agreement by saying, well, you're a libertarian on this, how can you not see how this applies to the war on drugs? And then open up the dialogue. And all of a sudden, because you didn't come at them adversarially, because you didn't find that, you think government should build the roads? Statist! So instead of attacking them over whatever their status on, what you do is you find the opportunity to agree first. That means you got to be a good listener. But we're not good listeners, we're assholes. Sorry. Don't hate me. Yes, sir.
Why do you think socialism is growing in popularity amongst millennial Americans?
I think on a surface level, it's sort of the idea, because we have, some aspects of democracy. I think that people believe that the role of government is to do good, right? And when you look at Hollywood, right, government are heroes, essentially, right? When you look at the military, for example, you see a lot of well-meaning people who want to do good. Leonardo DiCaprio. Don't you think that Leo is not sitting around going, wahaha, they're buying my global warming bullshit? No, he thinks that what he's doing is in his own best interest. I would really highly encourage you to read a book, I believe it's by Isabel Patterson, Gods of the Machine. And in it, she talks about humanitarians with guillotines. Leonardo is a humanitarian with a guillotine, essentially. He's coming around saying, yes, I'm here to save you, but if you don't let me save you, I'm going to kill you, tax you, regulate you. So I think that the problem with it is that young people think that government can do great things because they see things like, the incredible accomplishments of our military in World War II, and they lionize it and they romanticize it. And then they're also being fed things like, that World War II got us out of the Great Depression, which are lies. And we're told this in our government-run schools. Look up the Smoot-Hawley tariff if you want to know what it is that causes and extends Great Depressions. The types, as a matter of fact, it's interesting, if you've never watched, listened, or read Hillary Clinton's private speeches that she gave to those bankers, Hillary has displayed an economic knowledge that Trump has never displayed. Because she's talked about a hemispheric common market with open borders and open trade. And Donald Trump is talking about raising tariffs, forcing companies to repatriate. What Donald Trump is advocating for is essentially a return to the early 20th century style of governance, the old Italian fascism, essentially. So I think people think that government, because of the way that they portray themselves, and that Hollywood portrays it, that we're all being indoctrinated to believe that socialism is great, socialism is cool because we're all part of the family, we're all part of the community, and they mistake their own family and their own private property for other people's stuff, right? A socialism who says they don't believe in private property, ask them if you can have their iPhone, right? And it is interesting, I don't know how you guys feel about this pipeline that's going on there, but all of a sudden now, socialists are concerned about private property. Isn't that interesting? Private property is the essence of libertarianism. From this flows all the other concepts. Non-aggression flows from a concept of property rights. So the central thesis of libertarianism, I believe, is private property, ownership of self-ownership, and the ownership of the fruits of your labor. When you can get a socialist to agree to private property, you got it. Until then, this land is your land, this land is my land. I usually sing during these things, so I didn't want to let you guys. Last time I sang with Elton John. What's up?
I'm running for state house in this district, and I'm a conservatarian, libertarian Republican, and I was wondering what advice you might have for somebody like me, and how do you deal with times when you do have to, what is it that you're going to do in the future when you have to stand back from your principles?
I'll tell you right now, you can have an amazing campaign, even if you don't win. You can do incredible things if you're willing to put in the work. You know what I did in the beginning of my campaign? So when I would post a status on Facebook related to my campaign, people would like it and people would share it. People who share your post like you more than the people who just give you a little like. So 300 people might share a post, 1,000 people might like a post. Those 300 people who share, boom, click, message, hello sir, can I have your phone number and email and call you about my campaign? Yep, boom, email, phone number. Phone number, ask, and here's your trick, here's your secret. This is how you can absolutely make a huge splash. You talk to them, you ask them questions, you converse with them like a normal, rational human being, they understand what their concerns are, and at the end of the conversation, do this, trust me, just do it. Do it! Do this, okay? Say, when it's all over, say, hey, it's been great talking to you, can I ask you a favor? And then stop. They will. 90% of them will say yes. And then they don't know what the favor is. What's the favor? Will you please donate? 90% of them donate. That is the kind of turnover rate that you can have. But you have to ask. You gotta nut up or shut up. All right.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Just like a point I was making to my Yale chapter this morning as we were talking, from day one, society teaches citizens that taxation equals marriage, like only good things come from taxes. How do you think the best way to destroy this notion is?
It depends on the person. Right? So if we're talking strategy here. If you try and give someone a macro concept, they're probably going to be detached from it. So depending on the person that you're talking to, if you were a good listener and you found out what issues are important to them, and you find out what their woes are, I guarantee you somebody is suffering under some regulatory burden or some tax burden. So if you can make it personal, then you're gonna have a bigger impact, right? So like there's if they're a smoker, in Missouri they're trying to raise a cigarette tax to pay for schools, for example. Well, what if they don't have kids, right? So maybe that's the issue that you want to talk to them about, right? So that's very, make it personal. You know, if you're just like, well, taxation is theft, not that it isn't. But personalize. Yes, sir.
If taxation is theft, then how can a government morally raise taxes in a principled way?
Ah, yes. There's an article that I wrote. It's actually been included in a textbook in India. It's called, I know, it's weird. It's called 6 Ways to Fund Public Services in a Libertarian Republic. And if you go read it, then I'm your client, so definitely should go read it. But it's essentially tolls. You know what? One of the things that I like to talk about on the campaign trail was how the founding fathers managed to build more roads without an income tax. George Washington actually held a lottery, right? And if you hold a lottery, well, that's just a tax on people who are bad at math. And it's voluntary. So you can have tolls, lotteries, things like that. If you think about this, if you buy goods from overseas, you're going to have to pay a port fee. So the question is, do you pay the fee to the port, or do you pay the fee to the government to maintain the port? And then do you pay the government for security on the port? Right? So there will be some form of quote-unquote tax. The question is, who gets the tax, right? And if it's a private company, they're more apt to use that tax money to reinvest back into a better port to provide you with better goods and services. So there are ways to fund a government without theft, quote unquote. And it's more like extortion anyway, right? Buy or die, essentially. Like you pay or you go or you'll be punished. So yeah, so check it out. 6 Ways to Fund Services in a Libertarian Republic. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I believe you've said in the past that you don't believe in the non-aggression principle, or at least I see a lot of people on Twitter attack you for that. Can you clarify your...
Isn't that funny they attack me on the NAP?
Yeah. Please clarify what you believe.
So, this really hurt me during the campaign because I took a strong stand on the NAP. And sometimes I engage in hyperbole for satire or humor. The question of the non-aggression principle is one of, it begins with self-ownership, essentially, right? You can't commit aggression. It's similar to the golden rule, right? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. But the reason why I have such an issue with it from a very strict perspective is because I believe that the logical outcome of it means that, especially in international relations, means that you can only be a pacifist anarchist. And the reason why I say that is because, all right, this is a great exercise. I want to find somebody who looks neutral. Anybody here not a libertarian? Anybody here like just kind of new?
My mom.
All right, cool. All right, here's a question for you. All right, we're gonna do a little exercise. If you walk past a homeless person on the street, what's your name? Allie. If you walk past a homeless person on the street, Allie, and that homeless person is starving to death, right? And let's say you just keep on walking, right? And you don't feed them. Have you committed a crime? Have you initiated force against them? No? No both times, right? Now let's say you have a child, and it's your child, your human child, and this child is starving to death, and you are not feeding this child. You're neglecting it. And say that child dies. Have you committed a crime? Yes. Have you initiated force against the child? You don't know. Generally, most people will say no, you have not initiated force. The non-aggression principle specifically deals with the initiation of force. Anarcho-capitalist philosopher Murray Rothbard wrote in Ethics of Liberty that there is no obligation on parents to feed their child. Essentially that it should be, while it may be immoral to starve your child to death, it should not be illegal. So if you believe that parents starving their child to death is a crime, one which could be punishable, one which would involve a third party, i.e. government, potentially, or hey, I'll mount up the posse myself. If you don't want a government, I'll ride in to save the day. But just know that vigilante justice is not the kind of thing that we like to see in civilized societies. I'll do it, but if I have to live in Ancapistan. But essentially the issue, but I think some anarchists take the non-aggression principle a little too far, because essentially if the child is starving to death and the parent is neglecting their obligation to feed the child, if I step in, I am the aggressor. If the definition is aggression, right? I also just think that it makes us too damn pacifist. It doesn't mean that we need to be interventionists. It doesn't mean that we need to spread democracy overseas. But I actually had a conversation with an anarchist once who was talking about the threat of North Korea, the nuclear threat. And they actually, theoretically, can hit Alaska or Southern California. Now, we know that their ballistics math is bad. But theoretically, with the type of ICBMs they have, they could attack the United States with a nuclear weapon. So I said, okay, so let's say that they put the nuke on the launch pad, okay? Do we have the right to intervene and to blow that nuke off the launch pad? He said, no. I said, okay. So what if they start the countdown? He said, no. Because they haven't committed aggression. They haven't initiated force yet. I said, okay, so what happens once it gets off the launch pad and climbs in? Come on, anarchists, what are we going to do? And I said, well, the missile is arcing towards Southern California. I said, what will you do? He's like, well, I'll blow it out of the sky. I'll say, with what Air Force? You didn't fund one. So that's my issue, is that some people, I think, take it too far. And they, you know, if someone points a gun at you, you can blow them away, right? What if they don't have a bullet in the gun? They weren't a threat, but you thought they were a threat. Aggression is a very muddy concept. This is why I think that the non-aggression principle should flow from a theory of property rights and be reasonable about what constitutes aggression, right? Because starving a child to death is not aggression, right? It's not an initiation of force. It's neglect. It's non-initiation of an act, right? So because I like to be logically consistent, I sacrifice myself on the altar of libertarianism, and I take the shots, and I'm willing to criticize. Do you know why? Because I think for myself. I'm an individualist first. And I would rather stand against the tide against my own people, and know that I'm standing up for what I believe is intellectually consistent and principled, than sell out and say, oh yeah, okay guys. And so there were times when I was tempted on the campaign trail to just be like, the MVP is like, oh yeah, I believe it. And the neoconservatives actually have this thing, it's a Platonic concept, it's called the noble lie. And for like half a second I was considering it. The noble lie, if you guys aren't familiar, is what certain philosophers believe justifies lying to the people. And they justify it by saying the people are too stupid to accept the truth. Trump supporters might be proving us right. No offense if you guys are. Well, yeah, offense. I'm lying. No, I'm not. But the concept of the noble lie is essentially that if that the masses can't handle it. And at one point, just for half a second, I thought to myself, geez, I could get rid of all my problems right now if I would just lie to my own people. Just lie to them. And if libertarians incentivize that, because we do have our own little weird cultish groupthink going on. We do. We have our cult leaders, our demagogues, and anybody who questions the God of anarcho-capitalism, whoever it is that day, must, say 3 Hail Marys and, no, Hail Murrays. and drink 5 Bloody Marys. I hate that. I hate cultish thinking. I hate collectivism. I prize individualism. I want to ensure that I have the most consistent philosophy, and I see these inconsistencies when it comes to an application of this principle, and so I question it, and for that I'm a heretic. Well, cult of Rothbard be damned. I'll start my own damn cult with blackjack. Yeah. I'll let you say it. I'll cuss it out. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, first of all, sorry my baby was crying before.
Oh.
She's a statist, so.
Please don't starve her to death.
I kind of have a twofold question. First of all, number one, I'm a big fan of yours, and I really wanted you to be the candidate. But I guess, what could have Gary Johnson done better is kind of like my question, because I feel like this was a political season where libertarians could have done so well because the 2 major party candidates are so crappy. And also, I think libertarianism is awesome, but I think a lot of people don't consider it very seriously. And I'm wondering what needs to happen for libertarianism to be like a real force against the 2-party system.
Great questions. The first question is, what could Gary have done better? I don't know, hire me as his media coordinator, maybe?
Hire Bill Weld?
Right. It's a really intensely personal question, because I know him well. Gary and I used to be very good friends. I was actually the very first producer to ever book him on Fox News, and I've known him for years. And he's kind of not the same as he used to be. Something's a little different about Gary. But I think that, you know what, this is very superficial, but Gary, as running for president of the United States, needs to sit up straight, put his chest out, and lean into the camera, and come off like a commander in F-in-chief. That's the thing, it's as a media expert, let me just tell you, it's 90%, it's not what you say, but how you say it. I guarantee you, more than 50% of people who watch television, especially television news, actually watch it with the sound off. They're at home, they're taking care of their children or whatever, and they're watching television news and they're reading the chyrons at the bottom of the screen or the lower thirds. They're reading that and they're not hearing, right? So you could have a crazy voice like this, or you could be doing like this. Maybe don't do that. That would be good. But how you project yourself with confidence will tell people a lot. Right? It's the nonverbal cues are much more important, because I saw a lot of you guys nodding off during the speech when I was talking about Obamacare. And then when I would puff my chest up or give some big, flourish in my hands, all of a sudden I saw you popping up. Like, check out this lady right here. Right. Hitler knew this. Mussolini knew this. Trump knows this. Hillary knows this. Libertarians don't know this. Again, we're nerds, so we're spending a lot more time in the books than we are bulking up. Not to be safe for all of us. But again, if you're putting yourself out in the public, you need to project an air of confidence. I was so terrified, I can't tell you how many times I was terrified before debates. I was scared before I came out here today. But I'm damned if I'll let you see it. He needs to have canned answers. What is Aleppo? If you don't know what Aleppo is, you say, well, when Congress acts and gives me appropriate legislation, I will decide at such a time. But as it is, the President of the United States has no authority to do anything about Aleppo because that's not constitutional. Done. He doesn't- So yeah, we need some more bumper stickers there, Gary. If taxation is 100% taxation is slavery, at what percentage is it not? Bumper stickers, right? The idea that you can get these concepts out in a very slick, clean way. It's just, you gotta be ready for TV. You gotta do it. And as a matter of fact, I started up a nonprofit institution, Stonegate Institute, and starting next year, we're gonna have trainings across the country to teach you guys the tools that you will need in order to take this message and be more effective with it. Now, the second part of your question was?
What will it take for libertarianism to be like a major player in the political sphere, I guess?
You don't have to water down the principles. It's social skills that are going to do it. It's the hardest thing for libertarians to get into, because I'm not saying we are autistic, but we tend to be. I'm not saying that pejoratively. I'm saying that literally. And that's because we are hyper smart. And that's the thing, is that we don't care about what people think about how we look. That's why we show up in dirty outfits, we don't care. But you're sending signals that way. I mean, the thing is, the alt-right is professionalizing themselves, okay? If you look at the fascists in Europe, like the nationalist parties of Europe right now, they are making headway. Why? Because they're not a bunch of dirty stormfronters anymore with their swastika tattoos out on their arms. They have put on suits and ties, and they have infiltrated the system within. Rules for radicals: Saul Alinsky, socialist organizer, communist. One of the rules: cut your hair, put on a suit. Real radicals cut their hair, put on a suit, and infiltrate the system from within. Now, we need lots of different types of approaches. But if you're talking about a mainstream approach, you got to fit in so they don't know you're weird. Yes, sir.
How'd you go from being an MIT student to right now on Fox?
Musical theater?
Yeah.
All science. All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. We all, in our time, play our parts. One man has many roles. One man has many parts. I'll tell you this. In 2007, very briefly, 2007, Ron Paul was running for president. He spanked Giuliani. I was inspired. I hated taxes. Volunteered. Raised $1 million for him. Took a 12-person group, turned it into a 1,200-person group. Distinguished myself. And the Libertarian Party was like, you want to go? So that's how I went from musical theater major to presidential candidate. In olden days, a glimpse of stocking was looked on as something shocking, but now God knows anything goes. You can do whatever you want.
Donald Trump, is there anything that libertarians and conservatives can agree upon and share, or has that just gone off?
I think conservatives will vote for a libertarian if a libertarian is a real libertarian and defends their religious rights and their right to disagree. That's the problem, is that the too many libertarians who are secularists like myself want to come in and say, well, we're going to get God out of this, and we're going to take this off of them to the public square. What the hell? Why do you care? Right? Like, I'm not going to try and, as president, to take "In God We Trust" off of the money, because as Thomas Jefferson said, it neither picks my pocket nor breaks my leg. That doesn't mean I agree with it, but this is not the greatest harm to society. Right? And so I think if libertarians stand up for religious liberty, or the people that they disagree with even, defend the people, the right to disagree. That's the only time that it matters, by the way, is defending the rights of someone when you disagree with them, not when everybody agrees with you. So I think conservatives and libertarians can do well, but the problem is the libertarians. It's not the conservatives. Because conservatives right now are desperate for anyone to defend their rights, because nobody's doing it. No, they are under attack. So if you can be a real libertarian and articulate how you will defend people's religious freedoms, then I think you'll get elected as a libertarian. I didn't do too bad. Anybody else? Time for maybe one more. Yes, sir.
You say that you dislike the idea of needing a driver's license to drive. Do you think the same should go for any other kind of license, such as hunting, fishing, or marriage?
Definitely opposed to marriage licensing. Absolutely. I believe in a total. So about like those conservatives, we're talking about gay marriage. We may not agree. I believe in gay marriage. I think that this is a good thing for society because I'm always happy when someone finds love. Because I'm not interested in socially engineering and making sure that we have more families to work in the factories and build society. I'm not interested in this, right? So I may disagree with conservatives about gay marriage. So if I'm going to talk to a social conservative about marriage, and I want them to agree with me, then I say, you know what? I believe in a separation of marriage and state. And then they'll almost universally, they will say, I agree. Let's get the government out of marriage. So yeah, licensing, regulations, and taxes, I'm generally opposed. Yes, sir. Anybody? Again, I got time for one more. Yes, sir.
What are your thoughts on safe spaces?
At first I was triggered. But actually, you know what? I play devil's advocate a lot. Okay? Some people have been assaulted. Some people have been raped. Some people have been through horrendous pain. And I always want to try and think before I speak. Like, some of the problems that I see with the alt-right is that they are trying to hurt people's feelings. They are trying to make people angry. And I don't like that. I don't like safe spaces either. Because this is a naturalistic fallacy in some sense. But I mean, nature is not kind to us. No one is going to, pamper you once you get out of high school or out of college these days. So I think it's ridiculous that we try and create these quote-unquote safe spaces as a way of pampering people who are full-grown adults. But I also don't want to go out there and just say, I want to try and offend everybody that I can. Now, if I did, I could make a lot more money. As a matter of fact, if I really wanted to get rich right now, I would go on my website, start posting as much BS as possible. Juice boxes would turn the frogs gay, the New World Order! And try and offend absolutely everyone. Now, everyone would hate me, but I'd make a lot of money. But that's not the way for us to have a civil society. And that's actually kind of one of the criticisms that I've made of anarchists who tend to be jerks. Like, you need to behave in the way, the type of society that you want to have, because if you don't want the government to regulate people's